They assumed her petite frame meant fragility, that her quiet demeanor signaled submission. So when Marcus Reed threw a vicious right hook at Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez, outside the crowded sports bar in downtown Charleston, he believed he was teaching a lesson to someone who wouldn't fight back. No retaliation, no consequences, no real danger. She simply absorbed the impact, steadied herself against the brick wall, and wiped the blood from her split lip. But what none of the jeering crowd realized was that she wasn't backing down, she was calculating. And by the time Reed discovered what happens when you assault someone trained to neutralize threats in the world's most dangerous waters, the entire block would learn why you never, ever throw a punch at a Navy SEAL. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The evening had started innocently enough at Murphy's Tavern, a dimly lit establishment 3 blocks from the Naval Weapons Station Charleston. The kind of place where off-duty sailors mixed with locals, where conversations flowed as freely as the cheap beer, and where tensions occasionally bubbled over when alcohol met ego. Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez sat alone at the far end of the mahogany bar. Still wearing her civilian clothes, dark jeans, a simple gray sweater, and worn leather boots that had seen better days. At 5 feet 4 inches and 130 pounds. With shoulder-length auburn hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, Elena looked like a graduate student, or perhaps a local teacher enjoying a quiet drink after work. Her hands wrapped around a half-empty bottle of Corona, condensation pooling on the scarred wood beneath it. She'd removed her military ID and dog tags hours ago, tucked safely in her car's glove compartment. Tonight, she was just another face in the crowd. Invisible in the way she preferred, but invisibility, she'd learned, sometimes attracted the wrong kind of attention. Marcus Reed stood 6'2", with the kind of broad shoulders and thick neck that suggested countless hours in a gym. His buzz cut and the Marine Corps tattoo snaking down his forearm marked him as military, though his loud voice and aggressive posture suggested someone trying too hard to prove something. He'd been holding court near the pool tables for the better part of an hour, regaling his 3 companions with stories that grew more impressive with each round of shots. "That's the problem with this generation," Reed announced, his voice carrying across the bar as he lined up another shot. "No backbone. Everyone's soft now, especially the women they're letting into combat roles." His pool cue struck the cue ball with unnecessary force, scattering the remaining solids across the felt. They think because they passed some watered-down training program, they're suddenly warriors. His audience, 2 younger Marines and a civilian contractor, laughed uneasily. They'd heard this rant before, usually after Reed had consumed enough alcohol to amplify his already substantial ego. Tonight felt different, though. There was an edge to his voice, a meanness that hadn't been there an hour ago. Elena heard every word but didn't turn around. She'd encountered Marcus Reed's type countless times over her 12-year career, men who felt threatened by women in uniform, who needed to diminish others to feel superior. She'd learned long ago that engaging with such people only fed their need for confrontation. Better to finish her drink and leave quietly, but Reed wasn't finished. "Take that little thing at the bar," he continued, gesturing toward Elena with his pool cue. "Probably some Navy desk jockey pretending she's tough because she wears the uniform. Bet she's never seen real combat, never faced actual danger. These military women are all show, no substance." The bartender, a grizzled veteran named Tommy who'd been serving drinks for 20 years, caught Elena's eye in the mirror behind the liquor bottles. She gave him the slightest shake of her head, a signal that she could handle whatever was coming. Tommy nodded but kept his hand near the phone behind the register. Elena took another sip of her beer and checked her watch. 2,130 hours. She had an early morning briefing at 0600, followed by a training session with a new class of recruits. The last thing she needed was to get drawn into a bar fight with an ignorant Marine who confused volume with authority. But sometimes, the fight comes to you whether you want it or not. Reed's voice grew louder, more pointed. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out, addressing Elena directly now. "You military? You look like one of those diversity hires they're so proud of these days." Elena set her bottle down carefully and turned on her bar stool to face him. Her expression remained neutral, professional. "Just trying to enjoy a quiet drink," she said, her voice calm and measured. "Maybe we can all do that." Reed's companions shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in atmosphere. But Reed himself seemed energized by her response, interpreting her calm tone as weakness rather than control. "See what I mean?" he announced to the room. "No fire, no fight. They put these little girls in uniform and expect us to believe they're warriors." He took a step closer to Elena, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "What do you do in the Navy, Princess? File paperwork? Serve coffee to the real sailors?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The bar had gone quiet now, conversations dying as patrons sensed trouble brewing. Elena remained seated, her posture relaxed but alert. Those who knew what to look for might have noticed the slight shift in her weight. The way her feet found solid purchase on the floor. The barely perceptible loosening of her shoulders. "I teach survival," she said simply. Reed laughed. A harsh sound that bounced off the brick walls. "Survival? Like what? How to properly fold a fitted sheet." He turned to his audience, seeking validation for his wit. "This is what's wrong with our military. We're lowering standards to make everyone feel included." Elena stood slowly, leaving money on the bar for her drink and tip. She was done here. But as she moved toward the exit, Reed's hand shot out and grabbed her arm. His fingers digging into her bicep hard enough to leave marks. "I'm not done talking to you," he snarled. And that's when Elena Vasquez, veteran of 3 classified operations in hostile waters, instructor at the Navy's most elite training facility, and graduate of one of the most demanding military programs on Earth, delivered 5 words that would echo through Marcus Reed's mind for years to come. "You really should let go." Reed's response was swift and violent, a right cross thrown with all the force his 220-pound frame could generate. Aimed directly at her face. He never saw her move. The punch connected with a sickening thud that echoed through Murphy's Tavern like a gunshot. Elena's head snapped to the right, her body following the momentum as she staggered backward 3 steps before catching herself against the weathered brick wall. A thin line of crimson appeared at the corner of her mouth. Stark against her pale skin, the entire bar fell into stunned silence. 37 people witnessed Marcus Reed's fist collide with Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez's face. 37 people saw the impact drive her backward. 37 people waited for the explosion that never came. Reed stood frozen for a moment, his knuckles still stinging from the contact, his face flushed with alcohol and adrenaline. He'd expected screaming, crying, maybe a desperate swing in retaliation. He'd expected her to crumble, to validate every assumption he'd made about women in uniform. Instead, Elena simply straightened slowly, touched her fingertips to her split lip, and examined the blood with the detached curiosity of someone inspecting a minor paper cut. "Jesus Christ," whispered Jake Morrison, one of Reed's companions, his voice barely audible above the sudden quiet. "You just hit a woman." The bartender Tommy already had his hand on the phone, but something in Elena's posture made him pause. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shouting for help. She wasn't even looking particularly angry. If anything, she appeared analytical. Reed's chest heaved as he tried to process her reaction. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Where was the breakdown? Where was the proof that she was just another weak link in America's fighting force? That's what happens when you don't know your place, he announced to the room, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Maybe next time you'll think twice before. Elena pushed herself away from the wall with deliberate slowness. She reached into her back pocket and pulled out a small packet of tissues, extracting one to dab at her lip. The movement was precise, unhurried, almost meditative. When she looked up at Reed, her dark eyes held an expression he couldn't quite read. "Thank you," she said quietly. The words hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Reed blinked, certain he'd misheard. What? Elena folded the bloodied tissue carefully and tucked it back into her pocket. "I said thank you. You've just given me something I needed." Around the bar, confusion rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Sarah Chun, a civilian accountant who'd been playing darts with her boyfriend, found herself leaning forward despite her better judgment. David Torres, an off-duty Coast Guard petty officer nursing a beer near the jukebox, set his bottle down and turned to get a better view. Reed's face darkened. "Are you mocking me?" "Not at all," Elena replied, her voice carrying the same calm professionalism she might use to brief a room full of admirals. "You've clarified something important." She stepped away from the wall, and for the first time since the punch landed, she moved with purpose. Not toward Reed, that would have been expected. Instead, she walked to the bar where she'd left her jacket draped over the stool. Every eye in the room followed her movement. Tommy the bartender watched her approach, his weathered face creased with concern. "Elena, honey, you want me to call the cops? Security?" "Hell, I'll call the base if you want." She shook her head as she slipped her arms into her leather jacket. "That won't be necessary, Tommy, but thank you." Behind her, Reed's confusion was rapidly transforming into renewed anger. The room's attention had shifted entirely to Elena, and her inexplicable calm was making him look foolish. Worse, it was making him feel foolish. "Hey!" He barked, "I'm talking to you." Elena zipped her jacket with the same deliberate care she'd shown cleaning her lip. When she turned back to face him, there was something different in her demeanor. Not anger, that would have been too simple, too expected. Instead, there was a kind of professional interest, like a mechanic examining a particularly complex engine problem. "You know what the interesting thing is, Marcus," she said, using his name for the first time. Several people in the bar shifted uncomfortably at the intimate familiarity of it. Reed's eyes narrowed. "How do you know my name?" "Your friend said it 20 minutes ago when you were describing that bar fight in Oceanside." Elena gestured toward Jake Morrison, who had gone pale. "The one where you supposedly took on 3 guys outside a tattoo parlor." The color drained from Reed's face. He hadn't noticed her listening, hadn't considered that anyone might be paying attention to his stories. Elena continued, her voice carrying just enough to reach every corner of the now silent bar. "What's interesting is that you believe physical intimidation equals strength. You think volume equals authority. You assume that because someone chooses not to engage, they're incapable of engaging." She paused, studying his face with the same analytical attention she'd given her own blood. Those are dangerous assumptions in any profession. In mine, they can be fatal. Reed's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Elena reached into her front pocket and withdrew something small and metallic. In the dim bar lighting, it took a moment for people to recognize what it was, a simple military challenge coin. Dark bronze with an embedded trident barely visible in the shadows. She placed it on the bar next to her empty beer bottle. "It means," she said, "that you've just demonstrated poor target selection." The words sent a chill through the room that had nothing to do with the October evening outside. David Torres, the Coast Guard petty officer, leaned forward to get a better look at the coin, then sat back heavily as recognition dawned on his face. "Oh shit," he breathed. Elena picked up her purse and slung it over her shoulder. When she spoke again, her voice carried an undertone that made several people take involuntary steps backward. Murphy's has excellent security cameras, Marcus. High definition, multiple angles, full audio recording. What just happened here is now documented. Evidence of assault on a commissioned officer of the United States Navy. Reed's face went from red to ash gray in the span of seconds. But here's what's really interesting, Elena continued, moving toward the exit with measured steps. I have a training exercise scheduled for tomorrow evening. Scenario-based combat simulation. We're always looking for volunteers to help train our people in real-world threat assessment. She paused at the door, one hand on the brass handle. I think you'd be perfect for it. And with that, Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez walked out of Murphy's Tavern, leaving behind a room full of stunned witnesses and one increasingly terrified Marine who was just beginning to understand the magnitude of his mistake. The heavy oak door of Murphy's Tavern swung shut behind Elena with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the silence she left in her wake. Outside, the cool Charleston evening air carried the scent of salt from the harbor and the distant sound of traffic on King Street. Elena walked with the same measured pace she'd maintained inside the bar, her boots clicking against the sidewalk in a steady rhythm that betrayed nothing of what had just transpired. She didn't run. She didn't hurry. She didn't look back to anyone passing by on the street. She appeared to be just another woman heading home after an evening out, perhaps a teacher finishing grading papers at a local cafe, or a librarian who'd stayed late to reorganize the stacks. The split lip had already stopped bleeding, leaving only the faintest trace of what had occurred. Her leather jacket hung normally on her shoulders, showing no signs of the confrontation that had just unfolded. But inside Murphy's Tavern, the atmosphere had transformed into something thick and electric. Like the air before a thunderstorm, Marcus Reed stood motionless in the center of the room, his fists still clenched, his breathing shallow and rapid. The adrenaline that had surged through his system during the punch was now curdling into something else, entirely a creeping realization that he had fundamentally misread the situation. Did she just ... Jake. Morrison started to speak, then stopped, his voice trailing off as he stared at the bronze challenge coin still sitting on the bar. The trident emblem caught the light from the neon beer signs, casting tiny shadows across the scarred wood surface. David Torres, the Coast Guard petty officer, had moved closer to the bar for a better look at the coin. His face had gone pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his beer bottle. "Reed," he said quietly, "do you have any idea what you just did?" Reed spun around, his face flushed and confused. "I put some mouthy broad in her place. That's what I did. Did you see how she just walked away? Proves my point exactly. All talk, no substance." But even as he spoke the words, Reed's voice lacked its earlier conviction. There had been something in Elena's eyes during those final moments, something that didn't match his interpretation of events. It was like looking into deep water and sensing movement far below the surface. Sarah Chun, the accountant who'd been playing darts, set down her drink with shaking hands. "That woman just thanked you for hitting her," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of person thanks someone for hitting them?" Tommy the bartender had moved to the end of the bar where Elena's coin lay. Without touching it, he leaned closer to examine the markings. 20 years of serving military personnel had taught him to recognize certain symbols, certain indicators of specialization in training. What he saw made his stomach drop. "Reed," Tommy called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of confused conversations. "You need to see this." The entire bar seemed to shift toward Tommy's position, drawn by the gravity in his voice. Reed pushed through the small crowd, his bravado beginning to crack around the edges. "It's just some military trinket," Reed said, but his voice betrayed his uncertainty. probably bought it at a surplus store to impress people. Tommy shook his head slowly. These aren't sold in surplus stores, son. These are earned. He pointed to the intricate details etched into the bronze. See that anchor? The eagle? The trident? That's not just Navy. That's naval special warfare. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Pool games froze with cues halfway to their targets. Even the jukebox seemed to lower its volume out of respect for what had just been revealed. Doc Jake Morrison sank into the nearest chair, his face pale. Special warfare? Like ... SEALs? Tommy nodded grimly. Like SEALs. Reed's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound. The confidence that had carried him through the evening was evaporating like morning fog under direct sunlight. That's impossible, he finally managed. She was tiny. Women can't be SEALs. Actually, said a new voice from the back of the room. They can. Everyone turned to see Lieutenant Rebecca Hayes, a Navy intelligence officer who'd been quietly nursing a glass of wine at a corner table. She'd been watching the entire confrontation unfold with professional interest. And now she stepped forward with the authority of someone accustomed to briefing rooms full of senior officers. The SEAL program opened to women in 2016, she continued, her voice carrying the crisp precision of military training. The first woman graduated from basic underwater demolition SEAL training in 2021. Since then, there have been others. She paused, studying Reed's increasingly pale face. And if that coin is authentic, which it appears to be, you just assaulted one of the most elite warriors in the United States military. Reed stumbled backward, bumping into a bar stool that clattered to the floor. But she didn't fight back, he protested weakly. She just took it. That's not what elite warriors do. Lieutenant Hayes smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You know what elite warriors do when they're attacked? They assess the threat, evaluate their options, and choose the most effective response. Sometimes that means immediate action. Sometimes it means strategic patience. She gestured toward the security camera mounted in the corner of the room, its red recording light blinking steadily. What you just did is create documented evidence of assault on a federal officer, in front of 36 witnesses, while intoxicated. That's not just a local police matter, that's military justice system territory. And if she really is who that coin suggests she is, you've also just challenged someone who's trained to neutralize threats that are considerably more dangerous than a drunk Marine in a Charleston bar. The room had grown so quiet that the sound of ice settling in glasses seemed unnaturally loud. Reed looked around frantically, seeking support from his companions, but found only expressions of horror and disbelief. She said something about a training exercise, Sarah Chun offered hesitantly. Tomorrow evening. She invited him to participate. Lieutenant Hayes raised an eyebrow. Did she now? That's interesting. What does that mean? Reed demanded, his voice cracking slightly. Hayes considered the question for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. In my experience, when someone with that level of training offers to include you in a training scenario after you've just assaulted them, it's not because they want to be friends. She finished her wine and set the glass down with deliberate care. It's because they want to teach you something. And lessons from people like that tend to be ... memorable. Outside, Elena Vasquez walked steadily through the Charleston evening, her phone already in her hand. She had calls to make, arrangements to finalize, preparations to complete. The split lip had already stopped bleeding, but she touched it once more with her fingertip, not from pain but from purpose. Behind her, Murphy's Tavern buzzed with nervous energy and fearful speculation. But Elena wasn't thinking about what they were saying now. She was thinking about tomorrow evening, about controlled environments and documented lessons, about the difference between justice and vengeance, Marcus Reed had given her exactly what she needed. Clear justification for what came next. And what came next was going to be educational for everyone involved. Word traveled through the Naval Weapons Station Charleston with the speed and efficiency of a military communication network. By 0630 the following morning, 3 different versions of the Murphy's Tavern incident had already made their way through the enlisted mess, the officers' club, and the administrative offices scattered across the sprawling base. In the galley where Petty Officer, 2nd Class Maria Santos was serving breakfast, the story had evolved into something barely recognizable. "I heard she knocked him out cold with a single punch," whispered Seaman Rodriguez as he ladled scrambled eggs onto his tray. "Just dropped him like a sack of potatoes and walked out." Santos shook her head, wiping her hands on her apron. "My cousin Danny was there. He said she never threw a punch at all. Just took the hit and left. Real weird like." "That doesn't sound right," Rodriguez countered. "What kind of SEAL takes a punch and doesn't fight back?" "The smart kind," said Chief Petty Officer Williams, appearing behind them with the sudden materialization that senior enlisted personnel had perfected over decades of service. "The kind that knows the difference between a bar fight and a strategic opportunity." Rodriguez and Santos fell silent, recognizing the voice of experience when they heard it. Williams had served 22 years in the Navy, including 2 deployments with Special Operations units. If anyone understood the mindset of elite warriors, it was him. "You know something about this, Chief?" Santos asked cautiously. Williams poured himself coffee from the industrial-sized pot, his expression thoughtful. "I know that if Lieutenant Commander Vasquez wanted that Marine unconscious, he'd have been unconscious. The fact that he wasn't tells me she had something else in mind." Meanwhile, in the administrative wing of Building 442, a very different conversation was taking place. Commander Patricia Webb sat across from her deputy, Lieutenant Commander Michael Harrison, reviewing the overnight incident reports that crossed her desk every morning. The Murphy's Tavern situation had been flagged by the base's liaison with local law enforcement, though no formal charges had been filed. "Vasquez is one of our instructors at the Advanced Combat Training Center," Harrison noted, scanning the preliminary report. "Impeccable record. 3 combat deployments, 2 commendations for valor. Graduated top of her class from Bud S." Commander Webb frowned as she read through the witness statements that had been collected by Charleston PD. "Says here the perpetrator is a Marine. Marcus Reed, stationed at Parris Island. Blood alcohol of .12 and they tested him 2 hours later. He struck a commissioned officer while intoxicated," Harrison observed. "That's going to trigger a formal investigation regardless of whether Lieutenant Commander Vasquez presses charges." Webb leaned back in her chair, her fingers drumming against the desk. "What's interesting is that she didn't file a report. No call to base security, no request for medical attention, no formal complaint. For someone with her training and rank, that's unusual." Harrison nodded slowly. "Unless she's planning to handle it through other channels." "What kind of other channels?" Before Harrison could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen, then looked up with surprise. "Speaking of which, Lieutenant Commander Vasquez just submitted a request for the multi-environment training facility. Tonight, priority booking." Webb raised an eyebrow. "For what purpose?" "Hostile environment response training. Live scenario with volunteer opposition force." Harrison read further down the request form. "She's specifically requesting Marine participants. Says she has volunteers already lined up." The 2 officers exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their understanding of military protocol and the subtle art of lesson delivery. Across town, in a cramped apartment near the Marine base at Parris Island, Marcus Reed was experiencing his own version of morning revelations. He'd woken up with a splitting headache and a slowly dawning sense that the previous evening had gone very wrong indeed. Jake Morrison sat on Reed's couch, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his face drawn with exhaustion and worry. "Dude, we need to talk about what happened." Reed emerged from his bathroom, trying to piece together the fragments of memory that felt increasingly ominous in the harsh light of day. "It was just a bar fight. Jake, these things happen." "No, Marcus. This wasn't just a bar fight." Jake pulled out his phone and showed Reed a screenshot he'd taken of Elena's challenge coin the night before. "I did some research when I got home. That coin, it's real. And if it's real, that means she's real." Reed stared at the image, his stomach beginning to churn with something beyond his hangover. "Real what?" "Real special warfare. Real SEAL. Real trouble for you." Jake scrolled through several websites he'd bookmarked during his sleepless night. "I found some articles about women in the SEAL program. There aren't many, but the ones who make it through. Jesus, Marcus, the training these people go through makes Marine boot camp look like summer camp." Reed sank into his recliner, his head in his hands. "But she didn't fight back. She just took it and left." "That's what's got me worried," Jake said. "I keep thinking about what she said. About target selection. About training exercises." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "What if she wasn't backing down? What if she was setting something up?" Before Reed could respond, his phone rang with an unfamiliar number displaying a Charleston area code. He almost didn't answer, but something compelled him to pick up. "Marcus Reed?" The voice was crisp, professional, unmistakably military. "Yeah, who's this?" "This is Petty Officer Reynolds from the Naval Weapons Station Charleston. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez asked me to contact you regarding your participation in tonight's training exercise." Reed's blood turned to ice water. "Training exercise?" "Yes, sir. Multi-environment hostile response simulation. You expressed interest last night, and the Lieutenant Commander was able to secure you a spot. Report to Building 718 at 1900 hours. Come prepared for physical activity." The line went dead before Reed could respond. He stared at his phone, his mouth dry, his hands beginning to shake. Jake looked at him with growing alarm. "What was that about?" "She actually did it," Reed whispered. "She actually set up some kind of training thing." "You don't have to go," Jake said quickly. "Just don't show up." "What's she going to do? Come looking for you?" But even as Jake spoke the words, both men knew that avoiding the situation wasn't really an option. Reed had assaulted a federal officer in front of 36 witnesses. There would be consequences one way or another. The only question was whether those consequences would come through official channels or through the more creative approach that Elena Vasquez seemed to have in mind. In her office at the Advanced Combat Training Center, Elena was finalizing the evening's arrangements with methodical precision. The multi-environment training facility had been reserved. The observation deck had been cleared for witnesses, and the audio-visual recording systems had been tested and calibrated. She touched her lip once more, noting that the swelling had completely subsided. The split had closed cleanly overnight, leaving only the faintest mark that would be invisible by tomorrow. Perfect. Lieutenant Commander Harrison appeared in her doorway, his expression a careful blend of curiosity and concern. "Elena, I understand you have an exercise plan for this evening." She looked up from her paperwork, her expression serene. "That's correct, sir. Hostile environment response training. We've had several requests from Marine units for cross-training opportunities, and this wouldn't have anything to do with last night's incident." Elena's smile was slight but genuine. "Everything that happens tonight will be conducted according to regulation, properly documented, and entirely within the scope of approved training protocols." Harrison studied her for a long moment, recognizing the careful precision of her words. "I see. And the participants have been properly briefed on what to expect?" "They will be," Elena replied. "In detail." As Harrison departed, Elena returned to her preparations. By evening, Marcus Reed would understand the difference between strength and violence, between tactical restraint and weakness, between a barroom confrontation and a lesson delivered by someone who had earned the right to teach it. The training facility would provide the perfect classroom for that education. Marcus Reed spent the morning attempting to convince himself that the previous evening had been a victory. By 1,000 hours, he was holding court in the Marine Barracks common room, his voice carrying the forced bravado of someone trying to rewrite history through repetition. "You should have seen her face," he announced to a gathered audience of junior Marines, gesturing expansively with his coffee mug. Completely shocked. These Navy types talk a big game, but when it comes to actual confrontation, they fold like cheap suits. Lance Corporal Stevens, barely 19 and fresh from Camp Pendleton, looked up from his magazine with obvious admiration. "You really hit a Navy officer, Sergeant Reed." "Damn right I did," Reed replied, puffing out his chest. "Put her right in her place. Sometimes that's what it takes to remind people of the natural order of things." Corporal Martinez, who had more experience and considerably more sense, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Wasn't she pretty small? I mean, hitting a woman half your size doesn't exactly sound like a fair fight." Reed's expression darkened slightly, but he maintained his confident facade. "Fair fight? Martinez, this isn't about fairness, it's about hierarchy. About respect. These diversity hires think they can waltz into our world and demand equal treatment without earning it." "But what if she files a complaint?" asked Private First Class Johnson, his voice betraying genuine concern. "Assault on a commissioned officer is serious business." Reed waved dismissively, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his features. "She won't do anything. Trust me on this. If she was going to make a big deal out of it, she would have done it last night. The fact that she just walked away proves she knows she was out of line." What Reed didn't mention, what he couldn't quite bring himself to acknowledge even to himself, was the growing unease that had been building in his chest since dawn. The way Elena had thanked him for the punch, the deliberate calm of her voice when she'd spoken about target selection, the challenge coin with its unmistakable trident emblem, but admitting doubt would undermine the narrative he was constructing. So he pushed those concerns deeper and spoke louder. "Besides," he continued, "what's the worst that could happen? Some paperwork? A stern talking to from her commanding officer? These Navy desk jockeys don't have any real power outside their little administrative bubbles." Jake Morrison entered the common room just in time to hear Reed's latest proclamation. He'd spent the morning researching naval special warfare, training protocols, and had discovered details that made his stomach churn. The physical requirements alone were staggering. Candidates had to swim 500 yards, using breast or side stroke in under 12.5 minutes, complete at least 50 push-ups in 2 minutes, and run 1.5 miles in boots and pants in less than 10.5 minutes. And that was just the preliminary fitness screening. "Marcus," Jake said quietly, "can I talk to you outside?" Reed's audience was beginning to disperse anyway, heading off to various duties and training rotations. Stevens lingered, clearly hoping for more war stories, but Martinez grabbed his arm and steered him toward the door. "What's got you looking like someone died?" Reed asked once they were alone on the barrack steps. Jake pulled out his phone and scrolled to a bookmark he'd saved earlier. "I found some more information about that coin. About what it represents." "Jake, you're obsessing over this." "It was just, Marcus, shut up and listen to me." Jake's uncharacteristic firmness cut through Reed's bluster. "I found a news article from last year about a Navy SEAL who prevented a terrorist attack on a cruise ship in the Mediterranean. Single-handedly neutralized 3 armed hostiles while protecting civilian passengers." Reed felt a chill run down his spine, but he maintained his defensive posture. "What does that have to do with anything? The SEAL was a woman." Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez. The color drained from Reed's face as Jake continued reading from his phone. According to the report, she infiltrated the ship during a storm, eliminated the threats using hand-to-hand combat techniques, and evacuated 847 passengers without a single civilian casualty. Jake looked up from the screen. They gave her the Navy Cross for that operation. Reed's legs suddenly felt unsteady. The Navy Cross was the second highest military decoration for valor. Just below the Medal of Honor, only the most extraordinary acts of heroism earned that recognition. That can't be the same person, Reed said weakly. The woman last night was tiny. She couldn't have weighed more than 130 pounds. Marcus, do you know what the average weight of a Navy SEAL is? Jake asked. It's not about size, it's about efficiency, endurance, and precision. These people are trained to kill with their bare hands. Reed slumped against the stair railing, his bravado finally beginning to crack. But she didn't fight back. She just took the hit and left. That's what's terrifying, Jake replied. Someone with that level of training doesn't need to react immediately. They can afford to be patient because they know they'll get their opportunity eventually. As if summoned by their conversation, Reed's phone buzzed with a text message from the same Charleston number that had called earlier. Training exercise tonight. Building 718, 1900 hours. Failure to appear will result in formal military police notification of last night's incident. P.O. Reynolds. Reed stared at the message, his hands beginning to shake. They're threatening me now. Jake read over his shoulder and whistled low. Dude, that's not a threat. That's an ultimatum. Show up for whatever she has planned or face official charges for assaulting a federal officer. What am I supposed to do? Reed's voice had lost all its earlier confidence. If I go, she's probably going to kill me. If I don't go, I'll be facing court-martial. You should have thought about that before you decided to punch a Navy SEAL, Jake said bluntly. But maybe if you go and apologize, if you show some respect and humility, she might go easy on you. Reed laughed bitterly. Go easy on me? Jake, you just told me she single-handedly took down 3 terrorists. What makes you think she's going to go easy on a drunk Marine who sucker-punched her in a bar? Before Jake could answer, Staff Sergeant Williams approached from the parking lot, his expression grim. Reed, you're wanted in the company office, now. Reed's stomach dropped. What for? Questions about an incident last night involving Navy personnel. The captain wants to hear your side of the story before the official report gets filed. As Reed trudged toward the administrative building, his mind raced through possible explanations and excuses. But deep down, he knew that his carefully constructed narrative of dominance and victory was about to collide with the harsh reality of military justice behind him. Jake watched with a mixture of sympathy and dread. He'd served with Reed for 2 years and had seen him talk his way out of various scrapes and disciplinary issues. But this felt different. This felt final. In her office at the Naval Weapons Station, Elena was reviewing the evening's training scenario for the 3rd time, ensuring every detail was properly documented and legally sound. The multi-environment training facility offered perfect conditions for demonstrating the difference between aggression and skill, between size and capability, between assumption and reality. Her phone rang with an internal call from the base legal office. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez? This is Commander Peterson from JAG. I understand you had an altercation last night with a Marine from Paris Island. I wouldn't characterize it as an altercation, sir, Elena replied calmly. I was struck by an intoxicated individual. The incident was witnessed and recorded. And you're planning some kind of training exercise with this individual tonight? A standard hostile environment response drill, properly authorized and documented. Marine units have requested cross-training opportunities, and this scenario will provide valuable educational experience for all participants. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Elena, I want to be very clear about something. Whatever happens tonight needs to be absolutely by the book. No personal vendettas, no payback, no settling of scores." "Understood, sir. Everything will be conducted according to regulation." "Good, because if Marcus Reed ends up in the hospital, there are going to be some very difficult questions asked." Elena smiled as she ended the call. Commander Peterson was absolutely right. There would be no personal vendettas tonight. Just education. Very thorough. Very memorable education. Elena Vasquez sat alone in her quarters that afternoon. The silence broken only by the distant hum of base activity filtering through her window. The split-level apartment and officer housing was Spartan by civilian standards regulation furniture. Minimal decorations, everything in its designated place. But for someone who had spent months in hostile environments with nothing but essential gear, it felt luxurious. She moved through her pre-mission ritual with the same methodical precision she'd developed over 12 years of service. First, a review of personnel files. The base database had provided everything she needed to know about Marcus Reed's service record. Fitness evaluations, psychological assessments, disciplinary actions. The picture that emerged was of a competent but unremarkable Marine with an inflated sense of his own capabilities and a tendency toward confrontational behavior when drinking. More interesting was what the files revealed about his weaknesses. Reed had struggled with close-quarters combat training throughout his career, consistently scoring in the lower percentiles during hand-to-hand evaluations. His fitness reports showed declining performance in endurance categories, suggesting someone who relied more on initial aggression than sustained capability. Most telling of all were the counseling notes from his previous commanding officers, a pattern of overconfidence masking fundamental insecurities about his own competence. Elena closed the file and moved to her bedroom closet. Behind the dress uniforms and civilian clothes hung a black canvas bag that she hadn't opened in 3 months. She pulled it down carefully, feeling the familiar weight of gear that had accompanied her through some of the darkest missions of her career. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, lay items that told the story of her true capabilities. Night vision goggles from a classified operation in Eastern Europe. A ceramic knife that had saved her life during a hostage rescue in Somalia. Tactical gloves worn thin from training exercises that pushed human endurance to its absolute limits. Each piece represented not just equipment, but hard-earned expertise purchased with pain, exhaustion, and the kind of dedication that few people could comprehend. She selected only what she needed for tonight: lightweight tactical pants, a fitted black training shirt, and boots designed for maximum mobility and grip. As she changed clothes, Elena caught her reflection in the full-length mirror mounted on the closet door. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the quiet figure who had sat in Murphy's Tavern the previous evening. Gone was the soft civilian clothing that had made her appear unremarkable. Gone was the relaxed posture that had suggested vulnerability. In its place stood someone who moved with the fluid precision of an apex predator, compact, efficient, and utterly focused. Elena touched her lip one final time, noting that even the faintest trace of swelling had disappeared. Perfect. By tomorrow, there would be no physical evidence of Reed's assault. But the lesson she was about to deliver would leave marks that would last considerably longer. Her phone buzzed with a message from Chief Petty Officer Reynolds, who was handling the evening's logistics. Facility secured. Observation deck cleared for authorized personnel only. Recording systems tested and operational. Subject confirmed for 1900 arrival. Elena smiled at the efficiency of military communication. In the civilian world, organizing tonight's exercise would have required weeks of paperwork, liability waivers, and administrative approvals. In the Navy, it had taken exactly 4 phone calls and 6 hours of preparation time. She moved to her desk and opened a leather portfolio containing the evening's training protocol. Every detail had been carefully planned and documented. The multi-environment training facility offered multiple scenarios, from urban warfare simulations to shipboard combat training. For tonight's purposes, she had selected the Close Quarters Battle Module, a maze of adjustable walls and obstacles designed to test reaction time, spatial awareness, and tactical decision-making under stress. The scenario she had crafted was elegantly simple. Reed and 3 other volunteers would be tasked with navigating the facility to retrieve a simulated intelligence package, while avoiding or neutralizing hostile contacts. Standard military training exercise, used hundreds of times to prepare personnel for real-world operations. What made tonight's version unique was that Elena would be playing the role of the hostile contact all by herself, against 4 opponents in a controlled environment where every movement would be recorded and every tactical decision documented for later review. Reed would have numerical superiority, familiarity with marine combat techniques, and the psychological advantage of believing he was facing someone he had already dominated once. Elena would have something considerably more valuable: the accumulated expertise of someone who had survived situations where failure meant death. As she reviewed the facility blueprints one final time, Elena allowed herself to consider the broader implications of what she was about to do. This wasn't just about Marcus Reed, though he had certainly earned whatever education awaited him. This was about establishing precedent, about demonstrating to anyone who might be watching that certain lines could not be crossed without consequence. Sergeant Thompson, the most experienced of the group, looked up from the facility schematic he'd been studying. "Reed, I've been looking at this layout. Whoever designed tonight's scenario knows what they're doing. This isn't some basic obstacle course, it's a legitimate tactical environment." Private Martinez, the youngest member of their team, had been unusually quiet throughout the briefing. Now he spoke up with obvious concern. "Sergeant Reed, are you sure about what happened last night? Because if this woman really is special warfare, and if you really did assault her, this might not be the kind of training exercise we're expecting." Reed's facade of confidence finally began to crack under the accumulated weight of doubt and evidence. "Look, maybe I was wrong about some details. Maybe she's more qualified than I initially thought. But we're Marines. This is what we train for. Whatever she has planned, we can handle it." The briefing room door opened, and Chief Reynolds entered with a tablet and 4 sets of tactical gear. "Gentlemen, it's time to gear up. The exercise begins in 15 minutes. As they donned their equipment protective padding, communication headsets, and impact sensors, Reed tried to maintain his bravado. But the professional efficiency of the preparation process was beginning to make him feel like he was suiting up for something considerably more serious than a training exercise. Meanwhile, in the observation deck overlooking the training facility, a small audience was gathering. Commander Webb and Lieutenant Commander Harrison had been joined by several other senior officers, including Captain Morrison from the Marine Liaison Office and Commander Peterson from the Legal Department. The presence of JAGI personnel suggested that tonight's exercise was being treated as more than routine training. "Has anyone briefed the participants on exactly what they'll be facing?" Captain Morrison asked, his expression concerned. "Standard hostile environment simulation," Webb replied. "They'll be tasked with navigating the facility to retrieve an intelligence package while avoiding or neutralizing opposition contacts. Opposition contacts plural or singular." Webb consulted her tablet. "According to the exercise plan, they'll be facing a single hostile operative." Morrison frowned. 4 Marines against 1 opponent? That seems like overkill for a training scenario. Commander Peterson looked up from his own notes. "Unless the objective isn't to create a fair fight, but to demonstrate a specific tactical principle." In the equipment room below, Elena was completing her own preparations. She had changed into full tactical gear black combat clothing, lightweight armor, and equipment designed for maximum mobility and effectiveness. Her movements were economical and precise, each action serving a specific purpose in her overall preparation. She attached a throat microphone that would allow the observers to monitor her communications, clipped impact sensors to various points on her gear, and conducted a final systems check of her equipment. Everything functioned perfectly. As she prepared to enter the training facility, Elena allowed herself one final moment of reflection. What was about to happen would serve multiple purposes. It would provide Reed with a comprehensive education about the consequences of his actions, demonstrate to the observing officers the capabilities of properly trained personnel, and establish clear precedent for how such incidents would be handled in the future. But beyond the professional objectives, Elena acknowledged a more personal motivation. For 12 years, she had endured questions about her qualifications, doubts about her capabilities, and assumptions about her limitations. Tonight would provide a definitive answer to all of those questions. The facility's intercom crackled to life with Chief Reynolds' voice. All participants, prepare for exercise initiation. Scenario begins in 60 seconds. Elena smiled as she moved toward the entry point. 60 seconds until Marcus Reed discovered what it really meant to face someone who had earned their place among the military's elite. 60 seconds until a very comprehensive lesson in tactical reality began. Elena stood alone in the equipment staging area, separated from the main training facility by a single reinforced door. The fluorescent lights had been dimmed to simulate the low-light conditions she would be operating in once the exercise began, casting everything in a pale, clinical glow that made shadows dance at the edges of her vision. She moved through her final equipment check with the ritualistic precision of someone who had performed this routine countless times in environments where equipment failure meant death. Night vision goggles tested and calibrated. Communication system clear signal, proper encryption. Impact sensors properly positioned and responding correctly to the monitoring station. Each piece of gear was not just equipment, but an extension of her capabilities. Tools that had been selected and refined through years of operational experience. The transformation that had begun in her quarters was now complete. Gone entirely was the unassuming woman who had sat quietly in Murphy's Tavern less than 24 hours earlier. In her place stood someone who moved with the fluid economy of motion that marked truly elite operators. No wasted energy, no unnecessary movements. Every gesture serving a specific tactical purpose. Elena's breathing had shifted into the controlled pattern she had learned during her first deployment. A technique designed to maintain optimal oxygen levels while managing stress hormones. Her heart rate, visible to the monitoring technicians in the control room, showed the steady rhythm of someone entering a familiar operational state, elevated enough to ensure peak performance, controlled enough to maintain precise decision-making capability through the tactical communication system. She could hear Chief Reynolds conducting the final countdown. Exercise initiation in 30 seconds. All monitoring systems active. Medical personnel standing by. Elena closed her eyes briefly, not in prayer or meditation, but to complete the mental transition from instructor to operator. When she opened them again, her pupils had adjusted to the low light conditions, and her awareness had expanded to encompass every sound, every shadow, every potential variable in the environment she was about to enter. The facility beyond the door represented a carefully constructed replica of the urban combat environments where she had earned her reputation. Multi-level corridors designed to funnel movement through predetermined choke points. Concealed positions that offered tactical advantages to those who understood how to exploit them. Obstacles and barriers that could serve as cover for the prepared or traps for the unwary, but more than just physical layout. The facility offered something that Elena had been craving since the moment Reed's fist had connected with her face, a controlled environment where she could demonstrate, without ambiguity or qualification, exactly what 12 years of elite military training actually looked like in practice. 15 seconds, Reynolds announced. Elena's hand moved to the door handle, her grip firm but relaxed. Behind her, she could feel the weight of observation senior officers in the control room, monitoring technicians tracking every biometric indicator, medical personnel prepared for whatever casualties tonight's lesson might produce. All of them waiting to see how this carefully orchestrated encounter would unfold through the facility's internal communication system. She could hear fragments of conversation from Reed's team as they completed their own final preparations. Their voices carried the mixture of bravado and nervousness that she remembered from her own early training exercises, back when she had been young enough to believe that confidence could substitute for competence. Just remember, Reed was telling his teammates, stick together, watch each other's backs, and don't let her psychological games get in your heads. She's just one person. Elena smiled grimly at the comment. Reed's fundamental error hadn't changed since the previous evening. He was still thinking in terms of numbers rather than capability, still assuming that physical presence translated directly to tactical effectiveness. In a few minutes, that assumption would be corrected in the most direct way possible. 5 seconds, Reynolds announced. Exercise initiation on my mark. Elena's breathing steadied into the rhythm she had used during her most challenging operations, the hostage rescue in Somalia, where she had neutralized 3 armed terrorists in under 60 seconds, the intelligence-gathering mission in Syria, where she had evaded capture for 18 days behind enemy lines, the counter-terrorism operation in the Mediterranean that had earned her the Navy Cross. Each of those missions had required her to overcome numerical disadvantages through superior training, tactical awareness, and the willingness to do whatever the situation demanded. Tonight's exercise would draw upon all of those experiences, but with one crucial difference. Instead of facing genuine threats in hostile territory, she would be operating in a controlled environment against opponents who had no idea what they were actually dealing with. Mark, exercises live. The military was changing, slowly and sometimes reluctantly, to include women in roles that had been traditionally male-dominated. Elena had been part of that change, enduring skepticism, hostility, and outright sabotage from colleagues who resented her presence. She had proven herself again and again, in training and in combat. But there were still those who viewed her accomplishments as aberrations rather than earned achievements. Reed represented all of them, every officer who had questioned her qualifications, every instructor who had made training unnecessarily difficult, every teammate who had doubted her capabilities until circumstances forced them to acknowledge reality. Tonight's exercise would serve as a reminder that competence was not determined by gender, size, or appearance, but by skill, preparation, and the willingness to do whatever the mission required. Elena's personal phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. The caller ID showed her sister's number, Dr. Carmen Vasquez, a pediatric surgeon in San Diego who had never quite understood her sister's career choice. Elena, I just saw the news about some kind of incident at a bar in Charleston. Please tell me you weren't involved. Elena smiled at her sister's predictable concern. Carmen had spent their entire childhood trying to keep Elena out of trouble, a task that had become increasingly difficult as Elena gravitated toward activities that their mother had described as unnecessarily dangerous. I'm fine, Carmen. Just a minor misunderstanding that's being resolved through proper channels. Minor misunderstanding? The news report said a Navy officer was assaulted by a drunk Marine. If that was you, Elena, you need to press charges immediately. The situation is being handled appropriately, Elena said, her voice carrying the calm authority that Carmen had learned to recognize as her sister's professional mode. There won't be any need for civilian law enforcement involvement. Carmen was quiet for a moment, and Elena could practically hear her sister's medical training analyzing the implications of that statement. Elena, please tell me you're not planning to do something stupid. I'm planning to do something educational, Elena replied. There's a difference. That's what you said before you enlisted. And look how that turned out. Elena laughed, remembering the heated family discussions that had preceded her decision to join the Navy. Their parents had wanted her to follow Carmen into medicine, to use her intelligence and determination in ways that didn't involve deliberately placing herself in harm's way. This turned out exactly as I planned, Carmen. I found my calling. Your calling involves getting punched in bars by drunk Marines? My calling involves ensuring that people understand the consequences of their actions, Elena said. Sometimes that requires hands-on instruction. Carmen sighed, recognizing the futility of trying to dissuade her sister once Elena had made a decision. Just be careful, okay? I know you can take care of yourself, but I worry anyway. I'll be fine, Elena assured her. By tomorrow morning, everyone involved will have a much clearer understanding of how the world actually works. After ending the call, Elena returned to her final preparations. She had 2 hours before the exercise began. Enough time to review the facility layout one more time and ensure that every piece of equipment was properly calibrated. Tonight would be about precision, not passion. About demonstrating capability, not seeking revenge. About teaching lessons that would be remembered long after the bruises faded and the paperwork was filed. Marcus Reed had made the mistake of assuming that quiet meant weak, that restraint meant inability, that appearance determined capability. By the end of the evening, he would understand just how wrong those assumptions could be. The multi-environment training facility stood like a concrete monolith against the darkening Charleston sky, its windowless exterior giving no hint of the sophisticated combat simulation equipment housed within. By 1830 hours, the parking lot had begun to fill with vehicles as word of the evening's special training exercise had spread through both the naval base and marine installations. With the efficiency of military gossip, Networks. Commander Patricia Webb arrived first, her staff car pulling into a reserved space near the main entrance. She had spent the afternoon reviewing Elena's service record and the incident reports from Murphy's Tavern, trying to understand what exactly her subordinate had planned for the evening. The documentation was impeccable, every form properly filed, every authorization correctly obtained, every safety protocol addressed. But Webb's 23 years of military experience had taught her to read between the lines of official paperwork. Lieutenant Commander Harrison emerged from the passenger seat, carrying a tablet loaded with the evening's observer protocols. The facility is set up for full audio-visual recording, he reported as they walked toward the entrance. We'll have multiple camera angles, real-time biometric monitoring, and complete tactical analysis capabilities. Webb nodded, though her expression remained thoughtful. And Lieutenant Commander Vasquez? How did she seem during the briefing? Professional, precise, completely focused on the training objectives. Harrison paused at the security checkpoint, badging them both through the electronic turnstiles. But there was something else. An intensity that I've only seen in personnel preparing for actual combat operations. Inside the facility, technicians were completing final systems checks while Elena conducted her own inspection of the training environment. The close-quarters battle module had been configured to simulate an urban warfare scenario: narrow corridors, multiple levels, concealed positions, and obstacles designed to test tactical decision-making under stress. Motion sensors and pressure plates throughout the facility would track every movement, while overhead cameras provided complete visual coverage. Elena moved through the space with the fluid efficiency of someone conducting a pre-mission reconnaissance. She tested sight lines, identified cover positions, and mentally catalog the tactical advantages and disadvantages of each section. To an observer, it might have looked like a routine facility inspection. To anyone with combat experience, it was clearly the methodical preparation of someone planning a very specific type of engagement. Chief, Petty Officer Reynolds approached from the control room. His expression a mixture of professional respect and barely concealed curiosity. "All systems are green, Commander. We have full observation deck capacity, complete recording capabilities, and medical personnel standing by as requested." "Medical personnel?" Elena asked, raising an eyebrow. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. "Standard safety protocol for combat simulation exercises involving civilian participants, ma'am." Commander Webb's orders. Elena nodded, understanding the subtext. Webb was covering all possible contingencies, ensuring that whatever happened tonight would be properly documented and legally defensible. Smart leadership, but it also indicated that her commanding officer understood the potential for this exercise to escalate beyond typical training parameters. "What about the participants?" Elena asked. "Marine transport arrived 10 minutes ago. 4 personnel, as requested. They're currently in the briefing room receiving safety orientation." Elena checked her watch. 1850 hours. Right on schedule. "Have they been equipped with monitoring devices?" "Full biometric packages," Reynolds confirmed. "Heart rate, blood pressure, stress indicators, impact sensors. Everything will be recorded and analyzed in real time." "Perfect." Tonight's lesson would not only be delivered, effectively, it would be documented with scientific precision. In the adjacent briefing room, Marcus Reed sat with 3 other Marines at a conference table, trying to project confidence while his internal anxiety reached new heights. The safety briefing had been thorough and professional, covering everything from emergency procedures to communication protocols. But it had done nothing to alleviate his growing sense that he was walking into something far more complex than a routine training exercise. Corporal Jenkins, one of the volunteers Reed had recruited to support his narrative of Marine superiority, fidgeted with his monitoring equipment. "This seems pretty elaborate for a basic training drill," he observed. "I mean, full medical standby? Real-time biometric monitoring? That's usually reserved for advanced combat scenarios." "It's psychological warfare," Reed replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "They're trying to intimidate us before we even start. Classic Navy overcomplication of simple procedures." The door clicked open with the soft sound of electronic locks disengaging. Elena moved through the opening with the silent efficiency of someone who had spent years practicing movement in hostile environments. Her first steps into the facility were carefully measured, designed to minimize noise while maximizing her ability to gather intelligence about her opponent's positions and intentions. Facility's acoustic design had been specifically engineered to amplify certain sounds while dampening others, creating an environment where tactical awareness became the determining factor in survival. Elena could already hear Reed's team moving through the main corridor, their boots generating more noise than they realized, their voices carrying farther than they intended. She moved toward her first position, a concealed observation point that would allow her to assess their formation, tactics, and individual capabilities before making contact. Through her night vision equipment, the facility transformed into a clear, green-tinted landscape of opportunities and obstacles. Above in the control room, Commander Webb watched Elena's approach on the main display screen, noting the contrast between her movement and that of the Marine team. Where Reed's group moved with the straightforward aggression of traditional infantry tactics, Elena flowed through the environment like water, finding the most efficient path downhill. "Jesus," Lieutenant Commander Harrison murmured, watching Elena's biometric readings on his secondary monitor. Her heart rate is actually decreasing as she gets closer to contact. "That's not normal." Webb nodded, recognizing the physiological signature of someone entering what combat psychologists called flow state, the mental condition where training, instinct, and tactical awareness merged into something approaching supernatural competence. In the facility below, Elena had reached her first observation position and was conducting her initial assessment of the opposition. Reed's team was moving in a standard four-man formation, with Reed himself taking point and the others following in a disciplined but predictable pattern. Their equipment was properly maintained, their communication was clear and professional, and their basic tactics were sound. Unfortunately for them, basic tactics were not going to be sufficient for what they were about to experience. Elena adjusted her position slightly, ensuring optimal angles for what would come next, and activated her communication system to address the control room. "Observation complete," she reported, her voice carrying the calm professionalism of someone briefing a routine training exercise. "Initiating contact in 30 seconds. In the control room, the assembled officers leaned forward in their chairs. After hours of preparation and anticipation, the real lesson was about to begin. And in the facility's main corridor, Marcus Reed continued to move forward with the confidence of someone who still believed that last night's punch had demonstrated his superiority rather than sealing his fate. Close quarters battle facility hummed with the subtle electronic presence of activated monitoring systems, their sensors tracking every heartbeat, every breath, every step as Reed's four-man team advanced through the main corridor. The environment had been designed to simulate real-world urban combat scenarios, complete with adjustable lighting that could shift from daylight simulation to complete darkness in seconds, acoustic dampening that made sound behavior unpredictable, and obstacles that could be reconfigured to create new tactical challenges. Tonight, the facility was operating in what the technical specifications called hostile environment mode, reduced visibility, enhanced acoustic challenges, and environmental stressors designed to test decision-making under pressure. For Reed's team, moving through the maze-like structure felt like advancing through a building that might contain enemy combatants around every corner. Reed himself moved with the aggressive confidence that had characterized his approach to military training throughout his career. At 6 feet 2 inches and 220 pounds, he had always relied on physical presence and straightforward tactics to overcome obstacles. His approach to tonight's exercise reflected that same philosophy: advance steadily, maintain formation integrity, and use superior numbers to overwhelm whatever opposition they encountered. Behind him, Corporal Jenkins moved with nervous energy that his biometric monitors were broadcasting to the control room in real time. His heart rate had climbed to 110 beats per minute, despite the relatively calm nature of their advance, and his breathing showed the shallow pattern that indicated mounting stress. Jenkins had volunteered for tonight's exercise to support Reed's narrative about Marine superiority, but the professional atmosphere surrounding the event was making him question whether he truly understood what they were walking into. Sergeant Thompson, the most experienced member of their team, moved with the cautious professionalism of someone who had actually seen combat. His biometric readings were more controlled than Jenkins, but his tactical awareness was clearly heightened. Thompson kept scanning potential ambush positions, checking corners and elevation angles with the systematic attention of someone who understood that training exercises could be just as dangerous as real operations if proper precautions weren't observed. Private Martinez brought up the rear, his youth and relative inexperience evident in every movement. His heart rate had spiked to 125 beats per minute, and his communication check-ins were becoming more frequent as the team advanced deeper into the facility. Martinez had begun to suspect that tonight's exercise was about more than routine training, but his position in the military hierarchy prevented him from voicing those concerns directly. "Contact front," Reed announced suddenly. his voice carrying through both the facility's acoustic environment and the communication systems that linked all participants to the control room. The team froze in practiced formation. Weapons raised toward the intersection ahead, where a shadow had moved with too much purpose to be accidental. The facility's design created natural choke points at major intersections, forcing teams to expose themselves when transitioning between sections. Visual confirmation? Thompson asked, his voice steady and professional. Reed squinted through the reduced lighting, trying to identify specific threats in the maze of shadows and obstacles ahead. Movement detected, but no clear visual. Could be equipment malfunction or environmental factors. In the control room, Commander Webb watched their advance on the main tactical display while monitoring Elena's position on a secondary screen. Elena had positioned herself in an elevated observation point that provided excellent sight lines to the intersection where Reed's team was currently stalled. But her location was completely concealed from their perspective. "She's been tracking them for 3 minutes," Harrison observed quietly. "Complete situational awareness while remaining undetected. That's graduate-level tactical competence." Webb nodded, noting how Elena's biometric readings remained steady even as she prepared to initiate contact. Her heart rate had actually stabilized at a level that indicated optimal performance, elevated enough for peak physical capability, controlled enough for precise decision-making. Back in the facility, Elena watched Reed's team through her night vision equipment as they struggled to identify her position. Their formation was textbook correct for the tactical situation they believed they were facing, but it was optimized for confronting conventional threats rather than someone with her specific skill set and training background. She keyed her communication system to address the control room. Initiating first contact sequence. All safety protocols confirmed. Elena's first move was designed not to neutralize Reed's team immediately, but to disrupt their formation and create the tactical confusion that would allow her to demonstrate the difference between training exercises and operational reality. She activated a small device that generated the acoustic signature of movement in a corridor perpendicular to their current position, not loud enough to be obviously artificial, but clear enough to demand investigation. Reed's head snapped toward the sound, his tactical instincts correctly identifying it as potential threat activity. "Jenkins, Thompson, check that corridor. Martinez, maintain rear security. I'll hold this position." The team split according to standard small unit tactics, reducing their numerical advantage while exposing individual members to isolation and potential neutralization. Elena watched their movement with professional interest, noting how their textbook approach was creating exactly the tactical opportunities she needed. Jenkins and Thompson advanced toward the corridor where Elena had generated the decoy sound, their movement careful but predictable. Reed remained at the intersection with Martinez, both of them focused on potential threats from their front and flanks, while remaining unaware of Elena's elevated position behind them. Elena moved with the silent efficiency that had characterized her most successful operations. From her concealed position, she could see the entire tactical situation while remaining invisible to Reed's team. Her next action was calculated to create maximum educational impact while maintaining the safety parameters. That would keep tonight's lesson from becoming a genuine casualty-producing event. She dropped silently from her elevated position to the floor level behind Reed and Martinez, landing with the controlled impact technique that had been drilled into her during thousands of hours of close-quarters combat training. Her movement generated no sound audible to their position, but the facility's sensors registered her relocation and transmitted the data to the control room. "Contact rear," Martinez suddenly shouted, having caught peripheral movement that his nervous system interpreted as immediate threat. Reed spun around, his weapon raised, scanning for targets in the shadows behind their position. But Elena had already moved again, flowing through the environment with the fluid tactics that conventional military training simply couldn't prepare opponents to counter. "Where is she?" Reed demanded, his voice carrying frustration and mounting concern. "Martinez, what did you see?" "Movement, definite movement. But I can't get a clear visual." In the control room, the assembled officers watched Elena's tactical display with growing recognition of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just superior training in action. This was the demonstration of capabilities that existed at the intersection of natural ability, elite education, and operational experience that very few military personnel ever achieved. "She's not just avoiding detection," Captain Morrison observed with professional admiration. "She's controlling their tactical decision-making. Every move they make is in response to stimuli she's creating." Elena's voice came through the communication system with the calm professionalism of someone conducting a routine briefing. "First contact phase complete. Opposition has been successfully isolated and positioned for demonstration sequence 2. In the facility below." Reed's team had unknowingly arranged themselves exactly where Elena wanted them, separated, stressed, and focused on threats that existed only because she had created them. The real lesson was about to begin. Elena moved through the facility's shadows, like a force of nature given tactical form. Her 12 years of elite training condensing into moments of precision that redefined everything the observers thought they understood about combat capability. The demonstration she was about to deliver would serve as a master class in the difference between conventional military competence and the rarefied skill level that separated special operations personnel from even the most accomplished regular forces. Jenkins and Thompson had advanced into the decoy corridor, their formation textbook perfect for the threat they believed they were investigating. Their communication remained professional, their weapon handling was safe and controlled, and their movement showed the disciplined approach of well-trained Marines. Under normal circumstances, their tactics would have been entirely appropriate for the situation they faced. Unfortunately for them, the situation they actually faced bore no resemblance to anything their training had prepared them for. Elena's first contact came without warning or ceremony. Jenkins, taking point in the corridor investigation, simply disappeared from Thompson's field of vision between one step and the next. No gunshot, no shout, no sound of struggle. One moment Jenkins was advancing carefully toward a potential threat position, and the next moment he was gone. Thompson froze, his tactical training warring with the evidence of his senses. In conventional combat scenarios, enemy contact produced noise, muzzle flashes, and clear indicators of hostile activity. What had just happened to Jenkins defied every template. Thompson's experience had provided for understanding battlefield dynamics. "Jenkins." "Report," Thompson called out, his voice carrying more tension than he intended. The facility's acoustic design turned his words into echoes that seemed to bounce from every surface, making it impossible to determine whether Jenkins was 10 feet away or had been moved to an entirely different section. In the control room, the tactical display showed exactly what had happened. Elena had used a combination of leverage, momentum, and precise application of pressure points to neutralize Jenkins in under 3 seconds. The impact sensors on his equipment registered the takedown, but the biometric monitors showed that he remained conscious and uninjured, simply restrained in a position where movement or communication was impossible. Commander Webb leaned forward in her chair, studying the replay of Elena's technique. That was the rear naked choke variation from the MCMAP advanced curriculum, but modified for immediate neutralization rather than gradual submission. Harrison nodded, his expression reflecting growing recognition of what they were witnessing. "She's not just demonstrating superior technique, she's showing them methods that exist several levels beyond their current training." Back in the facility, Thompson's situation had become critical without him fully understanding how or why. His partner had vanished, His communication attempts were producing no response. And the tactical environment had shifted from routine exercise to something that felt increasingly like a genuine threat scenario. Control. "This is Thompson," he reported through his headset. "I've lost contact with Jenkins. Request immediate status update." Chief Reynolds' voice came through the communication system with professional calm. "Exercise parameters remain in effect. Continue mission objectives." Thompson's training told him to maintain operational focus, but every instinct developed through actual combat experience was screaming that something had gone fundamentally wrong. He began moving back toward the main corridor where Reed and Martinez were positioned. His weapon raised and his awareness heightened to levels he hadn't experienced since his deployment in Afghanistan. He never made it to the corridor. Elena intercepted Thompson at the junction between sections. Appearing from what had seemed like empty space with the sudden materialization that characterized truly elite close-quarters combat specialists. Her approach utilized angles and timing that conventional tactics simply didn't account for, not because those tactics were flawed, but because they were designed to counter conventional threats. Thompson had a fraction of a second to register her presence before Elena's training took over completely. The technique she employed was a modified version of the standing rear takedown, executed with the kind of precision that could only come from someone who had performed similar actions under life or death conditions. Thompson's impact sensors registered the contact. His biometric monitors recorded the stress spike. And then he too disappeared from active participation in the exercise. 2 down. 2 to go. In the main corridor, Reed and Martinez had heard fragments of Thompson's final communication. But the facility's acoustic properties made it impossible to determine exactly what was happening to their teammates. Reed's confidence, already undermined by the professional atmosphere surrounding tonight's exercise, began evaporating as he realized that they were facing something considerably more serious than he had anticipated. "Martinez, close up," Reed commanded, his voice carrying the strain of someone whose tactical situation had deteriorated beyond his ability to understand or control. "We're going to move back and regroup with the others." But Elena had already positioned herself to prevent exactly that tactical decision. Her movement through the facility had been designed to isolate each member of Reed's team individually, creating opportunities to demonstrate specific aspects of her training while maintaining complete control over the tactical environment. Reed's retreat brought him directly into Elena's chosen engagement zone, section of the facility where multiple corridors intersected, providing her with numerous approach angles while limiting his ability to establish defensive positions. The facility's designers had created this area specifically to test adaptability under pressure, but Elena was using it for a more pointed educational purpose. Martinez, following Reed through the intersection, became the third target in Elena's systematic demonstration. The technique she used was different from her previous engagements, this time employing the kind of joint manipulation that could immobilize an opponent without causing lasting injury, but with sufficient efficiency to remove any possibility of continued resistance. Martinez's disappearance registered on every monitoring system in the control room. His biometric readings showed elevated stress, followed by the controlled deceleration that indicated professional restraint rather than actual assault. Like his teammates, he remained conscious and uninjured, but completely neutralized as a tactical factor. Reed found himself alone in the intersection, surrounded by the shadows and echoes of a facility that had somehow swallowed his entire team while he watched. His heart rate, visible to the control room monitors, had climbed to 160 beats per minute, well into the range that indicated genuine panic rather than operational stress. "Control. I need immediate extraction," Reed called out, his voice breaking slightly as the full magnitude of his situation became clear. "My entire team is down, and I cannot maintain mission objectives." Elena's voice came through the facility's communication system, Calm and professional. Mr. Reed, the exercise is not yet complete. You still have objectives to accomplish. For the first time since entering the facility, Reed could hear his opponent clearly. Elena's tone carried no anger, no personal animosity, no indication that this demonstration was motivated by the events at Murphy's Tavern. Instead, her voice held the clinical detachment of an instructor delivering a particularly important lesson. "What do you want?" Reed asked, his weapon still raised despite the growing recognition that conventional tactics were useless against whatever he was facing. Elena stepped into view at the far end of the corridor, her form clearly visible in the facility's controlled lighting. She moved without haste, without theatrical presentation, with only the confident ease of someone who had complete control over every aspect of the tactical situation. "I want you to understand something, Mr. Reed," she said, advancing slowly toward his position. "Last night, you made assumptions about my capabilities based on my appearance, my size, and my reluctance to engage in unnecessary confrontation." Reed's weapon tracking followed her movement, but his hands were shaking now, making precise targeting impossible even if the exercise parameters had allowed for such escalation. Elena continued her approach, each step measured and deliberate. "Those assumptions led you to believe that physical assault was an appropriate response to a situation you didn't understand." She stopped approximately 10 feet from Reed's position, close enough for conversation, far enough to maintain tactical advantage. "Tonight, you've learned that appearances can be deceptive, that size is not the determining factor in combat effectiveness, and that restraint is not the same thing as inability." In the control room, the assembled officers watched this final phase of Elena's demonstration with the recognition that they were witnessing something that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. This wasn't just about correcting one Marine's misconceptions. This was about establishing new understanding of what elite military training actually meant in practice. Elena's voice carried through the facility one final time. "The question now, Mr. Reed, is whether you've learned enough to avoid making the same mistakes in the future." And with that, the real reckoning began. The silence that followed Elena's final statement stretched through the facility like a held breath, broken only by the soft hum of monitoring equipment and Reed's labored breathing echoing through his communication headset. In the control room, every observer leaned forward, understanding that they were witnessing the culmination of a lesson that had been 12 hours in the making. Reed stood frozen in the intersection, his weapon still raised but trembling in hands that had lost all confidence. The tactical situation had deteriorated so completely, so systematically, that he could no longer process what was happening through any framework his training had provided. 3 members of his team had simply vanished, removed from the exercise with a precision and efficiency that made conventional combat tactics seem clumsy and primitive by comparison. Elena remained motionless 10 feet away, her posture relaxed but alert, demonstrating the kind of controlled readiness that separated genuine professionals from those who merely wore the uniform. Her biometric readings, still visible to the control room staff, showed the steady heart rate and controlled breathing of someone operating well within their capabilities rather than at their limits. "I don't understand," Reed said finally, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality had just been systematically dismantled. "How did you? Where are they?" Elena's response came with the patient tone of an instructor addressing a particularly important learning objective. "Your teammates are secure and uninjured, Mr. Reed. They've been neutralized using techniques designed for precisely that purpose, to remove threats from operational effectiveness without causing permanent harm." She gestured toward the facility's overhead cameras, which had recorded every moment of the exercise in high-definition detail. Everything that happened tonight was accomplished using methods taught in advanced military training programs. Methods that prioritize efficiency over force, precision over aggression, tactical thinking over physical dominance. Reed's weapon began to lower as the implications of her words sank in. "You're saying this is all standard training?" "For personnel at my level, yes. The techniques I've demonstrated tonight represent basic competencies for naval special warfare operators." Elena's voice carried no boastfulness, only the factual tone of someone explaining technical specifications. What you experienced wasn't exceptional performance. It was routine application of skills that take years to develop properly. In the control room, Commander Webb was taking detailed notes while watching the exercise's concluding phase. The demonstration had exceeded her expectations in terms of educational value, providing clear evidence of the capabilities gap between conventional military training and elite special operations preparation. More importantly, it had done so without crossing the line into personal vendetta or unprofessional conduct. Lieutenant Commander Harrison monitored the biometric data from all participants, noting that Elena's readings remained consistent with someone conducting routine training rather than engaging in combat. Her heart rate had actually decreased during the final phase of the exercise, indicating a level of physiological control that reflected years of high-stress operational experience. "She's not even breathing hard," Harrison observed quietly. 4 opponents neutralized in under 15 minutes, and her vital signs look like she just finished a morning jog. Captain Morrison from the Marine Liaison Office watched Reed's tactical display with professional interest tinged by concern. "Look at his stress indicators. Heart rate over 170, shallow breathing, elevated cortisol markers. He's experiencing genuine fear." Elena's voice continued through the facility's communication system, maintaining its instructional tone. "Mr. Reed, last night you made a decision based on incomplete information. You saw someone you perceived as weak and chose to respond with violence." Reed's communication came through as barely more than a whisper. "I made a mistake." "Yes, you did. But the mistake wasn't just striking a superior officer, though that was certainly problematic. Your real error was assuming that your limited perspective provided accurate information about someone else's capabilities." Elena began moving again, not advancing toward Reed, but walking in a slow circle around his position, demonstrating the tactical control she had maintained throughout the entire exercise. Reed's weapon tracking followed her movement, but the gesture had become purely reflexive rather than tactically meaningful. "In military operations, such assumptions can be fatal," Elena continued. "Not just for you, but for everyone depending on your tactical decisions." Tonight's exercise was designed to illustrate that gap between assumption and reality. Reed's voice cracked as he responded. "What happens now?" Elena stopped moving and faced him directly. "Now you have a choice, Mr. Reed. You can interpret tonight's lesson as humiliation and allow it to generate resentment. Or you can understand it as education and allow it to improve your future decision-making." In the control room, Chief Reynolds received a communication through his headset and looked up at Commander Webb. "Ma'am, all participants' biometric readings are stable. Medical personnel report no injuries requiring treatment. Exercise objectives appear to have been completed successfully." Webb nodded, then activated her communication system to address the facility. "All participants, this concludes tonight's training exercise. Stand down from tactical positions and report to debrief stations." Elena's final communication came through with professional efficiency. "Understood, Control. All opposition force members are conscious and mobile. Releasing tactical restraints now." Within minutes, the facility's auxiliary lighting activated, transforming the environment from combat simulation back to training facility. "Jenkins, Thompson, and Martinez emerged from various locations where Elena had positioned them after neutralization, each looking somewhat dazed but entirely unharmed. Their expressions carried the particular mixture of confusion and respect that came from experiencing capabilities they hadn't known existed. Reed lowered his weapon completely as Elena approached for final debriefing. Up close, he could see that she showed no signs of exertion, despite having conducted a tactical exercise that had systematically defeated 4 opponents in a controlled environment. Questions about tonight's demonstration? Elena asked, her tone shifting back to the professional courtesy of an instructor wrapping up a training session. Jenkins was the first to speak. Ma'am, how long have you been training in those techniques? 12 years of continuous education, with approximately 2,000 hours of specific close quarters combat training and operational application in 7 different theater environments. Thompson nodded slowly, his combat experience providing context for understanding what that level of preparation actually meant. Ma'am, I've never seen anything like what you just demonstrated. Elena's smile was slight but genuine. That's exactly the point, Sergeant Thompson. Elite military capabilities exist at levels that most personnel never encounter. Tonight's exercise was designed to illustrate that gap. Martinez, still processing his rapid neutralization, asked quietly, Ma'am, what you did to us, could you have made it worse if you wanted to? Elena's expression became serious as she addressed the question that cut to the heart of the evening's lesson. Private Martinez, the techniques I used tonight were selected specifically for training purposes, maximum educational impact with minimum risk of injury. In operational environments, the same tactical principles can be applied with very different objectives. Reed finally found his voice again. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. For last night. For my assumptions. For everything. Elena studied his face for a moment, assessing whether his understanding was genuine or simply driven by immediate circumstances. Mr. Reed, apologies are less important than changed behavior. The question is whether tonight's lesson will influence your future interactions with personnel whose capabilities you may not immediately recognize. In the control room, the assembled officers were conducting their own assessment of the evening's events. The exercise had accomplished its stated objectives while remaining within all safety and professional conduct parameters. More significantly, it had provided clear demonstration of the capabilities that justified the military's investment in elite training programs. As the participants filed out of the facility for formal debriefing, Elena remained behind for final equipment checks and after-action reports. Her movements maintained the same professional efficiency that had characterized the entire exercise, showing no signs of the emotional satisfaction that might have accompanied personal revenge. This hadn't been about payback for Marcus Reed's assault. This had been about education, demonstration, and establishing clear understanding of what certain uniform insignia actually represented in terms of capability and training. The lesson had been delivered with surgical precision, and the students would remember it for the rest of their careers. The debrief session took place in Conference Room Alpha, a sterile environment with fluorescent lighting that felt harsh after the tactical atmosphere of the training facility. Reed sat across from Elena at a polished table, flanked by his 3 teammates who maintained the careful posture of personnel who had just experienced something that challenged their fundamental understanding of military capability. Commander Webb presided over the session with the methodical efficiency of someone conducting a routine after-action review. Though everyone present understood that tonight's events had been anything but routine, the conference room's recording equipment captured every word, ensuring that the lessons learned would become part of the official training record. Let's begin with basic outcomes, Webb announced, consulting her tablet. All participants completed the exercise without injury. All training objectives were achieved within established safety parameters. All equipment functioned properly throughout the scenario. Elena sat with the same composed professionalism she had maintained throughout the evening, her uniform showing no signs of the physical activity that had systematically neutralized 4 opponents. Her after-action report lay completed on the table before her, documenting the exercise with the clinical precision of someone accustomed to operational debriefings. Reed's hands trembled slightly as he attempted to complete his own paperwork, the adrenaline aftermath making fine motor control difficult. His teammates showed similar signs of stress processing, their movements careful and deliberate as they worked through the psychological impact of what they had experienced. "Mr. Reed," Webb continued, "please provide your assessment of tonight's training exercise." Reed looked up from his incomplete forms, his voice carrying none of the confidence that had characterized his behavior 24 hours earlier. "Ma'am, I believe I significantly underestimated the tactical situation. My assumptions about the opposing force were completely incorrect, leading to tactical decisions that proved inadequate." Elena watched Reed's response with professional interest, noting the careful language he was using to describe what had essentially been a complete educational dismantling of his preconceptions. The fact that he was speaking in tactical terms rather than personal ones suggested that at least part of tonight's lesson had achieved its intended effect. Webb turned to the other participants. "Sergeant Thompson, your observations?" Thompson, whose combat experience provided context for evaluating what they had encountered, spoke with the measured respect of someone who recognized superior training when he experienced it. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Commander Vasquez demonstrated capabilities that exist well beyond conventional military preparation. The techniques she employed were unfamiliar to our training background, but clearly represent advanced tactical education." Jenkins and Martinez nodded agreement, their expressions reflecting the particular humility that came from discovering how much they didn't know about their own profession. The exercise had provided them with direct experience of the capabilities gap between different levels of military training, a lesson that would influence their approach to future tactical situations. Elena spoke for the first time since the debrief began, her tone carrying the instructional authority of someone delivering important professional guidance. "Gentlemen, tonight's exercise was designed to illustrate several key principles that apply to military operations generally." She paused, ensuring she had everyone's attention before continuing. "First, tactical assessment must be based on verified intelligence rather than assumptions derived from appearance or initial impressions. In operational environments, such assumptions can compromise mission effectiveness and personnel safety." Reed shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the direct relevance of her words to his behavior at Murphy's Tavern. Elena continued, "Second, individual capabilities can vary dramatically even within similar ranks and military occupational specialties. Elite training programs exist specifically to develop skills that exceed conventional military preparation." She looked directly at Reed as she delivered her third point. "Finally, professional restraint should never be interpreted as inability or weakness. In military contexts, the choice not to engage immediately often reflects tactical thinking rather than tactical limitation." Webb made notes throughout Elena's debriefing points, recognizing their value for future training protocols. "Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, would you characterize tonight's exercise as representative of standard special operations capabilities?" Elena's response was carefully measured. Tonight's demonstration represented basic competencies for naval special warfare personnel. The techniques employed are routine applications of skills developed through standard training programs, though the tactical integration required for their effective use does represent several years of specialized education. The implications of her statement settled over the room like a heavy weight. What had seemed like supernatural tactical ability to Reed's team was, according to Elena, Merely routine competence for personnel at her level of training. Reed found his voice again, though it carried a quality that hadn't been present in his speech for years. Ma'am, what you're saying is that there are others who can do what you just did. Elena's smile was slight, but genuine. Mr. Reed, what I demonstrated tonight represents entry-level proficiency for special operations personnel. There are individuals whose capabilities make tonight's exercise look like basic training. The statement hung in the air as Reed processed the full magnitude of how wrong his assumptions had been. Not only had he assaulted someone whose training far exceeded his own, but that person represented merely one example of a broader category of military professionals whose capabilities he had never understood. Webb concluded the formal debrief with administrative efficiency, but she addressed Reed directly before dismissing the group. Mr. Reed, there will be formal consequences for last night's incident, to be determined through appropriate military justice channels. However, tonight's training exercise will be noted in your record as voluntary participation in advanced tactical education. Reed nodded understanding, recognizing that Elena had provided him with the most favorable possible outcome given the seriousness of his original offense. As the participants prepared to leave, Elena approached Reed for a final private conversation. Her tone remained professional, but carried a note of genuine instruction rather than personal antagonism. Mr. Reed, you asked earlier what happens now. Here's what I recommend. Use tonight's experience to recalibrate your understanding of military professionalism. There are people serving at every level who possess capabilities that aren't immediately obvious. Respect that reality rather than testing it. Reed met her eyes directly for the first time since the Murphy's Tavern incident. Ma'am, I will, and thank you for handling this the way you did. Elena nodded once, then gathered her materials and departed with the same quiet efficiency that had characterized her entire handling of the situation. 3 months later, Reed would request transfer to a unit with more rigorous training standards, seeking to develop the kind of professional competence he had witnessed that evening. His teammates would carry the memory of Elena's demonstration throughout their careers, using it as a benchmark for understanding what true tactical excellence looked like. And throughout the Navy's special warfare community, word would spread about the instructor who had turned an assault into an education, demonstrating that the most effective response to disrespect was not anger, but rather the kind of professional lesson that left no doubt about the reality. Behind the uniform, Elena Vasquez had proven once again that real strength didn't need to announce itself. It simply performed when circumstances required. Demonstration. The lesson had been delivered with precision, documented with care, and remembered by everyone who witnessed it. Some truths, after all, were worth teaching properly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.